It's my pleasure to introduce Aisha Bowe, who's a visionary leader whose journey is a testament to daring ambition, resilience, and the drive to make space meaningful, not just personally, but for our collective future. Aisha's path towards space in the C-suite began in community college, encouraged by her father to take a math course despite a high school counselor who had suggested cosmetology as an ideal career. Aisha was fueled by a love of science fiction and a determination to dream bigger. She transferred to the University of Michigan, earned degrees in aerospace and space systems engineering, and went on to build a 6-year career designing trajectory control systems at NASA. She has said that she wanted to go to space, but didn't think it was possible. But when the opportunity came, she said, now is the time. On April 14th of this year, Aisha realized that dream aboard Blue Origin's new Shepard NS-31 mission, the company's 11th human flight in its first all-female crew mission. For about 10 minutes, Aisha crossed the Kármán line, roughly 62 miles above Earth. She experienced weightlessness and gazed back at the planet without borders. That view she shared was, quote, just beautiful and deeply transformative. As the first person of Bahamian heritage and one of only 6 Black women to cross the Kármán line, her flight represented not just personal achievement, but a symbolic milestone in expanding access to space and inspiring future generations. She joined an all-female crew alongside other pioneers representing diverse career paths and journeys, and in what was heralded as a historic step forward for women in space. Aisha's journey from community college to founding STEM Board and Lingo to traveling to space is about more than breaking ceilings. It's about building new ladders. Her work aligns closely with ClearanceJobs' mission, expanding opportunity, diversifying talent pipelines, and empowering individuals to launch meaningful careers in national security and aerospace. Please join me in welcoming Aisha Bowe, engineer, entrepreneur, space traveler, and advocate for the next generation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Wow, guys, such a wonderful and glowing introduction. I have to tell you, when I started thinking about my remarks for today, I was really excited because I could talk to you guys about what really happened. And if I can figure out how to use this mouse, yes. You know, there's never a presentation that doesn't include technical challenges. So I just kind of lean with it and rock with it. But I really want to start from the beginning because the biography that was presented was a far cry from where I actually started out. And I started here. And I share this with you because when I go out to schools and students today, I let them know that in many instances, I never thought that I would be on stage anywhere talking about anything. I mean, heck, I'm still surprised that I'm like a positive contributing member of society. And a lot of that comes from the fact that when I was younger, I was dealing with a lot of situations that I could not change. You don't choose where you're born and you don't choose who you're born to. And as a young girl, I did not find careers in math and science exciting. That's not what I was interested in. I took pop culture and I kind of just got lost. I didn't think it was cool to be smart. And more importantly, I didn't apply myself. And because I didn't apply myself, I sunk deeper and deeper into this hole. And in that hole, what I found was that society judged me. It judged me for things that I had a lot of difficulty trying to understand how I could ever change. If I did not have the best of resources, and if I didn't have a stable home, and if I didn't have educators or people around me who believed in me, how was I going to become successful? And so when I was in high school, as Alex alluded to, I had the fated conversation with the guidance counselor. And my guidance counselor looked at this piece of paper and said, I don't think you're going to be a strong student. I don't think that you are college material. I think that you should focus yourself on a vocation. And I remember walking out of that encounter feeling really angry and not really knowing what to do because I was told that college was for people who had 4.0s. I thought that if I didn't have a sense of what it was I was going to do or who it was that I was going to become from an early age, that I wasn't going to be successful. And so I did not apply to college. I went to community college. And when I was in community college, it was the best thing that happened to me. Can I ask you guys, how many here recruit or hire from community college? A little higher, please. Thank you. I want everyone to see. I hope one of the things that you take out of this conversation is if you're not recruiting from there, you should be. Because in this community college environment, I talk to individuals from all walks of life. And the one thing that was unifying was everyone was being held back by something that someone said that half the time they couldn't even remember that they said it to them. So I would talk to women who said, I never thought I was pretty because my mom made a comment when I was in 6th or 7th grade. I would talk to guys who said, oh, well, I didn't make the football team, so I thought I wasn't gonna be strong. I mean, just really small, subtle things that people allowed themselves to be held back by. And it really started to, cause me to think about my mindset and why I thought that I could not be successful and why I thought that my high school grades would be an indication of my lifetime aptitude or ability to achieve. And I sat there and I was like, well, what if the things that I thought or were told were sometimes true, but not always? And I'll be the first to tell you, when I decided that I was going to be something, most people, they laughed in my face. They were like, how are you going to go from community college to being in university? And I said, I'm going to start by being completely and totally unrealistic. Because reality is what got me this far. So maybe if I subscribe to this fantasy land, a reality where I am a graduate of one of the best aerospace schools in the country, and I study something that stands for excellence, and I have a goal that people think is beyond reach, that maybe I can actually do it. And so I started my degrees in aerospace with pre-algebra in this community college. And each semester, I got to be just a little bit better until I found myself in the undergraduate program at the University of Michigan. I was an aerospace undergrad. But the problem with being an aerospace undergrad was because I went to community college, my courses transferred in, but not my GPA. And so when I went to try to get an internship, guess what? Y'all wouldn't hire me because I did not have a GPA that they thought was high enough. And I went and I would talk to recruiters. I would talk to people in industry and they were like, hey, you're gonna have to stick this out for a year or two. But I had 2 of the hardest years of engineering, the last 2 years at Michigan. And I cried in the library. I had a really difficult time, but I made it. But my GPA, it wasn't exactly a 4.0. And so I walked into the office of a professor who's still my mentor today. He used to be the head of science mission at NASA, Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen. And I said, I really want to work on satellites. I have made it this far. I have no parents to support me. I don't have anybody to believe me. I'm one of 3 African-American students out of 200 at the University of Michigan right now. And I know this is what I want to do. And if you take a chance on me, I know I will be successful and you won't regret it. And he looked at my transcript and he said, this is kind of a reach for a master's program. You're looking for redemption. And I'm not sure. And he looked me in the eye and he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to conditionally admit you. And we'll have this conversation after the first semester. I 4-pointed that first semester in the master's program. And I never forgot that, because he did not look at the grades. He looked at the person and who I was and what I went through. It didn't just count for something, it meant everything. And he said, if you can end up in the same place as all these other people who had been given all these resources and had been tutored, then I am going to help you. And I came out of that program with this passion to work on nanosatellites. These were the early days where NASA was exploring whether or not these platforms were going to be viable. And my graduate project was a nanosatellite adapter to be used for multiple payload deployment. And a gentleman came from NASA Ames, and he interviewed my entire graduating class. Lockheed came as well. They were just rolling up the JSF program, and they wanted to hire all of us. And once again, they did not offer me a job. I actually kept in contact with that hiring manager. His name was Ed. And he sent me a note years later and said, I wish that our requirements were different, but I never could have gotten you through. But NASA was different. And so I went to work supporting a little-known company back in the day called SpaceX. And we were helping them to launch multiple nanosatellites. They were launching out of Kwajalein. And I also had an opportunity to support Rapid Responsive Space, who was launching out of Kirtland Air Force Base. And so as a rookie engineer, I was able to take 3U satellites to Kirtland, to brief the colonel, to go to Kodiak. And I started to realize that my entire life had changed because of one conversation with one person who stuck his neck out for me. And not only was I surviving, I was thriving. And I started to really wonder, why was it that I was one of a few when more than likely I was probably one of many? And I loved working at NASA. I mean, I stayed for 6 years. I would have stayed for longer, but I ran up against some challenges. And one of the challenges that I faced was I was so passionate about going and talking to students in schools that I would go there with my astronaut ice cream, and I had this slide deck, and I want to talk about aerospace and what we were doing. And the kids literally looked at me like I was an alien. And they're like, we don't believe that you have degrees in aerospace. I'm like, your teacher worked really hard. Please do not embarrass her. Okay, she's been writing for months. She finally got someone from NASA to come. I am here. And I literally carried my degrees in the trunk of my car like I was Jay-Z with mixtapes. And I have to show the kids the degrees because they didn't believe it. They said, you must have been perfect. You must have had everything go right because you're working at NASA. And I said, that is the opposite. And I would show them these grades. And I would talk to them about my upbringing. And a funny thing started to happen. These kids started to study engineering. But I could only go to the schools that I was allowed to go to because I was a working engineer. And that was not my day job. And so I started to say, how can I take the thing that I love to do? And how can I expand my reach? How can I go into the community? And how can I really inspire the next generation? And what I looked at was our model, how government contracting works. Because as a government employee, I was a GS-13 at 25 at NASA. I was on boards where we were looking at SBIRs. And, no shade, but I would look at some of these corporate capabilities and say, I could do this myself, right? And I went to my mentor, the very same person who hired me, and I said, what if one day I don't want to work in NASA, I want to work with NASA? What if one day I want to have my own company? What would you think about that? He said, I'm going to help you do it. Because once you do it, it will become a model. And I really think that you can go out and you can change the world. And part of why he did that was because of this. because he knew at 25 as a GS-13, I was going to top out mid-30s. And I was going to have to sit in a government job for almost 10 years before they probably would have made me a 15 or an SES, because they gave us the stats on promotion. But in that 10 years, I have not only built one company, I built two. In that 10 years, I have not only raised money to go to space, but I have helped educate over 14,000 people around the world, and I leave here to go on tour for the United States and the Philippines. And so we're gonna talk about this a little bit more, because had I stayed there, had he not stepped aside and said, we're gonna use this NASA platform to cultivate you and to help you grow your own government contracting company, I would not have had this tremendous story to be able to share with you. Yes, next slide. Awesome. So what is STEM board, and what do we do? And I'll tell you, I had a little bit more fun with this slide today. We have a traditional capabilities briefing, but I figured I wasn't gonna bore you guys with that because you see a lot of those. But essentially, we were founded off this principle of excellence and equity. Equity through inclusion and engagement. And what we do is we support, and I'm super proud to support, by the way, U.S. Special Operations Forces. We do data science and data analytics. Yes, I've primed at SOCOM. We also support nuclear stockpile management. Yes, I've primed at DTRA. We also support data science and data analytics at DIA. And we support requirements development at NGA. We were an NGA mentor protege company. We are a Nunn-Perry Award recipient. We are Virginia's Best in Business. We are an Inc. 5000 company twice. We also have a joint venture, was recently awarded a ceiling contract of $946 million from NGA. So we do know what we're doing. We're a small business though. We're 40 people, and I'm competing with talent with all you guys. And so how do I do that? It's not through showing the 3 ISO certifications or the CMMI level 3 or our benefits package. It's through demonstrating that if we do not evolve, if we do not put our industry in the same vein as art, sports, and culture, that we will die. Because people are choosing between going to work for us and going to work for commercial companies. We're literally competing with Sexy Red. And while that may sound like a joke, if we don't make what we do fun and exciting, it will be impossible for the 16 and the 17 and the 18-year-olds to choose to pursue it. And so we have a conversation in the company, next slide, about this principle. And when people ask me who it is that I want to be, I say I would like to be the Rihanna of technology or the Riri of space. And what I've found, and I know this principle to be true, is that genius is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And these rooms, we represent opportunity, we represent salaries and careers that will literally change people's lives. I went from making $10 an hour to making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, to having a mother who did not graduate from college, who is now 3 years into a degree program in college, who is employee of the month every month in my second business, to being able to support people who send their kids to school. That is what happens when we decide to take a chance and change someone's life. And how do I do this? I do this by thinking outside of the box, because it wasn't enough for me to build this company to donate and to give back. What I needed to do was build a pipeline. And what I found was a lot of meaningful nonprofits were having workshops and they were teaching kids things, but guess what they didn't have? They didn't have the industry expertise or experience. And so I went to our GovCon partners. I went to General Dynamics, I went to Lighthouse, I went to Siemens, and I said, what if I built a solution that could allow us to take some of the very same problem sets that we experience and distill it in a compact form factor and give it to students who had not traditionally had it? What would you think? And they said, well, why don't you pilot it and see if it actually works? So we started over 3 years ago teaching the fundamentals of geospatial intelligence to students in East St. Louis. Any of y'all ever been to East St. Louis? And you know what that's like. And a funny thing happened. The kids came out of those class engagements and they said, I want to work for GDIT. I did not know that being in defense was going to be so exciting. They literally were talking about how learning about satellite trajectories in high school was like the most exciting thing that they had done that week because they worked with their hands. They worked with each other. They built things. And so after going from 0 schools to 17 schools in East St. Louis, into Inglewood, into Tampa, into Denver, I said, you know, we're going to have to expand this. We're going to have to figure out a way to take this to other government contractors, to take this to other nonprofits, because these kids are taking this box and they're taking this experience and they're iterating on it and they're building things and they're deciding that they want to go and be part of their ROTC. They're deciding that they want to enlist. It's not that they're interested, it's that we had not been reaching them. Next slide. And so I took up another challenge and I said, how am I going to do this? I'm running a GovCon, which we weren't going to be building product. And so I went out with the help of my team and my engineers, and we raised $2.3 million to build these kits and found a second business called Lingo. And in this period of time, thanks to our GovCon partners, we've educated over 14,000 students. I have taught these kits as an English language technical teaching tool, that's a tongue twister, in Mongolia. I've taught them in Kenya. That actually became an award-winning short-form documentary produced by BBC Storyworks. Look at that. I'm getting ready to go to the Philippines for Space Week, where I'll be teaching the space lesson. We have taught them in Kyrgyzstan, we've been in India, we've been in Egypt, and we're doing this all around the country today. And this is pipeline. But I can't employ all these kids. I can't clear all these kids. I need to work with you guys in order to do this. But I also want you to know, these kids are so excited about this that they're like, how can I actually build satellites in real life? And I'm like, yes. How can you? Let me refer to you to some of our partners, and maybe you can figure out how you can get in the pipeline early. And I know that these things matter, but I had a problem. I still wasn't sexy enough. Now, not me personally, but the industry, the company, wasn't sexy enough. And so I went back to the drawing board, because while we had been giving these kids kits, and while we had been working with these major partners, and while I ended up on Bloomberg talking about this with Romaine, and everything felt like it was sunshine, rainbows, and lollipops, I still had the sexy red problem, which is that every day our youth are being bombarded with culture. And I said to myself, how do I actually put what we're doing on the same level of culture? I'm not going to be able to do this unless I can take aerospace and I can mix it with celebrity. And the previous slide, we're going to have to go back because this is a good one. This is Claire. Now, proof that I'm aging like fine wine is in the first picture. This is me at 23. I look the same, right? Woo. And this is Claire. She's 13 years old. I met Claire at an aviation day at Hiller Museum in the Bay. Claire comes up to me. She says she wants to be an aerospace engineer. She was also an early tester of the Lingo kits, but I'll get back to that later. She says she wants to be an aerospace engineer, and so I invited her into my job. Now, I do not have children. I did not know I could bring minors to work, but apparently they don't have IDs and it's okay and security's cool with it. And so I said to Claire's mom, I promise I'm not going to drive more than 35 miles an hour, and we'll walk most of the time when we're on-prem, but can she hang out with me? At the end of the first day, I enjoyed her so much because I didn't really know what 13 years was like, right? And they're actually really cool. They're highly evolved beings. And she came with her NASA notebook, and she was ready to learn. She had great questions. And I said, whenever we have a seminar, because we're a research facility, you can come back and you can come hang out with me. And so over the course of that summer, she met astronauts, she met leading experts, she got to go to the wind tunnel. That's actually us near the inlet of one of the largest wind tunnels in the world. And she said, I think I'd like to come back next year. Do you think you'll mentor me? Well, 13 turned into 16, and I helped write a letter of recommendation for her to become an intern, which at 16, we weren't super used to 16-year-olds interning, but it was great, and it worked out for her. And then at 18, she says to me, I think I want to go study aerospace at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Will you write a letter of recommendation? Absolutely. And at 22, when she graduated, she said, I think I'd like for you to speak for my senior capstone. Will you keynote? I said, yeah. And then she says to me, I think I want to work at a little-known company called Blue Origin. What do you think? And I said, you have the rest of your life to be in traditional space. Why don't you go into new space and tell me what that's like? Well, Claire not only went to Blue Origin, but Claire became an engineer on the rocket engines at Blue Origin. And in 2022, that's right, 2022, remember that, when I signed my contract to fly with Blue Origin, after becoming the first Black female on the planet to raise and have private backing for my seat. It wasn't a nonprofit. I went out and I raised the money from industry partners to do it so I could own the footage, so I could own the narrative, so I could do meaningful science, which we're about to talk about. Claire actually helped build the rocket engine that I flew on. And so people were asking me, how do you know that what you do and the story about STEM and engagement matter? I know that because when I stepped in that rocket, I knew I was safe because she helped build it. And so this is a picture of Claire and I that morning. I'm getting ready to put on my suit and go out to the launch, and I'm nervous. There's a ton of choppers in the sky. We got Katy Perry, we got Gayle King, a lot is going on, right? And she looks at me and she was like, you are gonna be safe, enjoy the day. And so this is us afterwards with the shield. And the story is not just my story, it's her story. And it's the story of all the people whose lives change when we choose to go down into middle school, in high school, and grow the pipeline from the ground up. And so I want to double tap on this. I've been talking about the future, and I've been talking about the playbook, and the reality of it is that we're all in a war for talent, and we can't secure the future running yesterday's plays. We must innovate. We must be able to bring what it is that we do to the forefront. And that's why I committed to the Blue Origin mission that I did. And there's been a lot of controversy, and quite frankly, I understand and I think the discussion is healthy. But what I want the community to understand is what it was that I accomplished in my seat and what it was that came out of what I now know to be as one of the most watched space events in history. I got some of the statistic, 175 billion impressions on our launch. I was in Amsterdam and I got spotted. It was crazy. I literally have had to change my hair color multiple times because I'll have middle schoolers waving at me on the street because they saw that. Even though there was a lot of concern about, well, should we have celebrities in space? Is this even meaningful? It was 10 minutes. Well, let me tell you what we did in 10 minutes. Next slide. Oh, can we press play on this beautiful space footage? Oh no, you know, it's always the videos. The video, yes, okay. So there's me, and I'm floating around, you know, I'm having a good time here. This is great. And part of this was about demonstrating that the earth was not flat, right? I have those people in my family too. It's crazy to me. I was at the BET Awards, I saw Cam Newton, I literally popped up behind him and I was like, earth's not flat. And I kept going. But what you can't see here there's a few kind of things going on. One, I partnered with a company that I actually think is in this area called BioServe. I don't know if you guys heard of them, but they create tubes that are sort of like syringes. And what it allows you to do is to mix medium in space so that you can experiment. Prior to this, and actually let's go to the next slide because I think there's probably a clear picture of this, or somewhat of a clear picture of this, but this is kind of the far left. So when I signed on in 2022, the first thing I did was I read the human spaceflight regulations. And I laid out a training program that emulated all of what I could expect to experience in space. Yes, I have flown an L-39. Yes, I have trained at the only human-rated centrifuge in North America at 6 Gs. Yes, I've jumped out of planes. I mean, my friends at this point in time are like, we don't want to travel with you because we're going to be doing crazy things and we're gonna tap out of this. But I tried to closely align 2 years worth of training with what I could expect to experience. That's also why I looked so calm and collected on the day of the launch, because I had been there, I had done that, I was ready for it. But behind the scenes, I also did a survey of what companies and what institutions I wanted to advance because I own the seat, and I could go to Blue Origin and say, we're going to integrate this payload. We are going to do this research. And so I selected Winston-Salem, which is an HBCU. They put together a predominantly female research team, and we sought to correlate previous NASA data on genetically sequencing crop plants. We chose 6. The problem was I could not get a Kennedy fixation tube because Blue Origin had not been doing this kind of research before. There was one other only instance of it, and the guy had tried to plunge the tubes on his ankle. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about trying to do crunches in microgravity, but as much as I appreciated his abdominal strength, I was not about to do that. I was not about to risk that we were not going to have a great experiment, so I needed something else. I needed something that could actually go in the side pocket. And so I went to a company that's here in Colorado called BioServe, and we were able to flight qualify these tubes while conducting the experiment to correlate previous NASA data. Now, for those of us in the industry, we know how hard it is to flight qualify hardware. It's very difficult. They're going to be able to take this and use this as a basis, not only to do research in the future on New Shepard, but to do it on other vehicles. The second thing was Winston-Salem as HBCU. I knew that they had a phenomenal astrobotany lab because of the work that I had been doing at NASA, but I had not previously seen it elevated as I felt that it should. Well, not only were we able to successfully conduct this mission because we had the hardware and we had the science, but you guys, I got 2 mics on, I'm trying not to move. Thank you for bearing with me. We're gonna make it though. But we were also able to get meaningful data because Blue Origin was willing to integrate the timestamps that I needed to plunge the experiment into the calls into the cabin. Once again, this came about because what? I owned the seat, right? So as a customer, they had to integrate my payload, they had to conduct my science. And then lastly here, I'm wearing a bio button. And the reason why I'm wearing a bio button is I wanted to contribute to the data about African American female physiology in space because we need that data for the future. And so I collected my biometrics prior to and after the flight. I also wanted to make a statement about ethical contribution of human data, right? That's probably a question, there's a conversation that can be had about that in Q&A, so I'll move forward, but ethics is important here. And I wanted to demonstrate that this data, which goes into the NASA repositories, can help round out some of the data points that they need to develop long-duration space flight solutions for the non-traditional, which we'll leave it at that. Next slide. All of this culminated in us, and I'm super proud of this, right? Because I care about the center. I know people were looking at celebrity, but I care about publications. As someone who spent several years at NASA writing papers on flight trajectory optimization, which never comes up in bar conversation, no one ever asked me about it, this is what's important, right? Contributing to the knowledge base. This student from Winston-Salem, who never thought that she was going to have an opportunity to work on a spaceflight project, is now supporting research that is being internationally published and presented in Sydney next month on our data, which came out of the flight, that validates NASA results. And that's what we did in 10 minutes. And that's what happens when people like you or I decide to get involved in commercial spaceflight. It's not a stunt. We put together meaningful campaigns that allow not only ourselves to be seen, but allow us to interweave our legacies with the past, which brings me to this flag. And this isn't just any old American flag. This is the personal flag of Pete Conrad. This is the flag that Pete took to the moon. And when I flew the Museum of Flight in Seattle went into the display case and they sent it to my house. And I will never forget that day because when FedEx delivered it, the FedEx guy said to me, I normally never do this, but there's something in here that is special. I have been given instructions to deliver this that's unlike anything that I've ever received in my life. And I just want to know, could you open it? Could I see what's inside the package? He's like, I've worked for 20 years and I've never asked anybody to see what's inside the package. And so I opened the package and there we had, it was perfectly packed and preserved, the flag. And he looked at me and he said, how is it that you had the Museum of Flight in Seattle send this flag, something that literally went to the moon with an Apollo astronaut, to your door? And I said, it's because Nancy Conrad, the wife of Pete Conrad, who I met my first week of work at NASA over a decade ago, and who has mentored me to this day, has followed my journey and who understood that when people go back and when they look at the flight, they need to understand the real from the fake. And there are just some things you cannot buy. You cannot buy integrity, you cannot buy trust, and you cannot buy legacy and legitimacy. And so we needed to ensure that this flag flew again. And if you go to the Museum in Flight in Seattle, you'll see two certificates. You'll see Apollo, and you'll see mine from NS-31. Next slide. And so as we open up to question and answer, because I left some time for questions, I'm sure you probably have some, I want to double tap on the fact that if we want to redefine talent of tomorrow, we have to work on what it is that we do today. We have to think about how we recruit, where we recruit, who gets recruited, and pushing for people who may not have previously met what we consider the bar to have chances. Because had it not been for a series of people who put their neck out for me, I would not be before you here today. Thank you. Yes.
So you were talking about how you had a couple interviews or at least applying to a couple defense contractors
Yeah.
who didn't meet their criteria or meet their requirements.
Yep.
And you were able to go kind of alternative route to NASA. What were some of those requirements? Was it just GPA? Was it what was stopping or what was their hang up?
I mean, it was a couple things, right? It was GPA, it was internships, it was experience in the classroom. There were just so many things that they were looking at. And it was also my resume, and I see this a lot with the kids that we work with, especially in the inner city schools. They don't understand that they need to put keywords in their resumes. They don't know how to write them. They don't know how to interview. And so there were so many factors from, whether or not I actually had the right attire to be interviewed, to whether or not somebody had prepared me, whether or not I had any understanding of the company or the job, my GPA, my internships, that it was just you have the pedigree, this institution, it's a stamp. But many of them told me that I'd have to go in, get a job, wherever I could get a job, and then come back where they weren't evaluating my undergrad or grad GPA and try again.
I know
Yes.
you were prepared and calm, cool, and collected for the space flight, but you had to have been scared. Legit, were you scared going up there?
I was not, but this was an inflection point in my life. This year has been unlike any year that I've lived. And not so much because of the crew, but I lost my father on the 6th of January. And so I had gotten through, the funerals. We had two. We had one in Michigan and one in the Bahamas. And I'll be honest, I had a double gin and tonic. I just rolled off the flight. I was going to go home and I was going to decompress. And I got a call from Blue Origin. And I was like, I signed my contract in 22. I wasn't expecting that in January of this year that they were going to call me and tell me that they were going to launch a campaign and fly me in 45 days. And so I kind of said, everything happens exactly the way that it should. And so when I stepped in the rocket, I just had this feeling that I was where I was supposed to be, and whether or not this was going to be something that I survived, it was exactly what it was supposed to be. I also felt like these were going to be some really great pictures in my obituary. I think they'll be in there either way, but I mean, this is a highlight section, right? It's like me, you know, we got some great suiting. They did a good job with the design of the suits. I was pretty happy with it. Oh, yes.
So you overcome a lot of adversity, obviously. What's next for Aisha Bowe?
Well, I got to go to Manila tomorrow. I think what's next for me really is building on our company. We're about 40 folks now. We're bidding prime on a lot of things. We're trying to scale and expand. And I literally just took my team into the Bahamas, where I've hosted a camp for the last 10 years for underserved kids. And I took the key performers from my nuclear profile, my SOCOM profile, and my NGA profile, and they came out of it and they were like, we understand why we work for you. We understand why defense and national security and what we do is really important. And I want to be able to bring and scale those experiences in the world. But I need partners, I need primes, I need opportunity. And so I'm really invested this year on building our footprint and also showing that you can run these companies. I mean, most of the people that I meet are just like, wait, you're a defense contractor? I'm like, yes. And it's fun. But outside of that, we have books, we have documentaries, we have a lot of other assets that I'm going to be dripping out, because at the time that we had the launch, the public wasn't really ready to receive the idea that maybe there's research here, or maybe there's something meaningful here. And so you're going to see that from me as well. But like, I really want to be a $100, $200 million company first, though. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, thank you for taking the time to be here.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me to be here.
Amazing story. Can you explain the lingo boxes a little bit more? That
Yeah.
really piques my interest. What's in them? How do
Sure.
people use them? How do they get hold of them?
Absolutely. So lingo, this is after the talk, so I'll just give you the 2D. So we were going into a lot of schools and places where the teachers were not STEM experts, and the kids did not have parents that could help them with their homework. And so when I thought about lingo, I thought about all the kids who were being taught to the standard, right? They were actually being taught how to take tests and not necessarily useful material. And so we sat down and we said, all right, let's look at what we wanted them to learn from a space curriculum. And how do we tie it to national learning standards so that it could be taught in school, right? The variable X could be math or it could be computer science. You could talk about environmental monitoring from a biology perspective. There were all these ties that we could basically make to get ourselves into the schools. And so we built self-paced, self-contained modules where myself or an engineer is teaching the classes. They're on demand. We built curriculum, we built lesson planning, and we actually aligned them to state standards. And then we went in and we actually trained the teachers. And it wasn't a heavy lift because we were teaching the classes, because we had the curriculum, because we'd already done the road mapping, and because we had kind of told them where they could integrate it with their classroom so that they could technically still teach their standards. It was adopted so quickly. And that's how we ended up in 17 schools in St. Louis. And that's why these boxes have been really popular, because the teachers don't have to become STEM experts to teach them. We now have over 10 lessons. The last 2 lessons are like my favorite kids. I know I'm not supposed to have favorites, but I love the last 2. We have Countdown to Launch, where the students build a rocket launch countdown timer so they could actually emulate some of what happens on launch day. It will toss them anomalies. They'll have to abort, they'll have to think about it, and sometimes do it again. And then we built one where you're detecting, and this isn't a fictional world, but you're detecting changes in ice caps by calibrating a color sensor in fictional lingo land. We also have a actuator, so you have to move your satellite prototype so they can learn about actuation and how satellites move. And then they have to gather all that data and they have to report on it. And that integrates so many things, right? It's math, it's earth science. And so the teachers are bringing it into the classroom and they're using it on top of some of the theoretical principles the kids are learning. And you can get them from us. Yes. So the young man in the back, you've been so patient raising your hand. Who did I go with into space? Yeah. Do you know them? Does anybody know them?
Katy Perry first.
Yes, okay, Katy Perry.
Did she say anything that Katy Perry would
Did she what? I actually couldn't hear it. So it was me, obviously, and then you have Katy Perry, Lauren Sanchez, who's an Emmy Award-winning journalist and actually a helicopter pilot, Amanda Wynn, who's a civil rights advocate, Gail King, who you probably have seen in the morning while your mom's getting you ready for school, and then we had Carrie Ann Flynn. I'm like, did I forget anybody? No, I think that was everybody. Me plus those 5. Yes.
Can you share what you talk about with the kids as it relates to your mindset?
Yeah, I really try to instill in the kids that they have to focus only on what it is that they want to do. I think when you're growing up, there's so much noise and there's a lot of pressure. And a lot of the kids I talk to, they're in really tough situations. And once you take control of the internal narrative, your exterior changes. But for many of the kids, this idea of working on their self-confidence, this idea of creating micro accomplishments and building communities that support your goal is foreign to them. Because look, I'm very honest. When I started my business, pretty much everything that you saw on this deck, my mom and my family was not on board for. And so by being able to really just be honest and relate to them and show my grades, they're like, you're not all that different than me. And if I can take this story, I can channel this inspiration and build a community that can help me reach my goals and take control of my inner narrative, which I'm working on for my upcoming book, which is about reprogramming your self-operating system or your internal SOS. Yes, in the back.
So first off, credit, you are already moving in this direction, but you mentioned you want our culture to match that of sports and entertainment.
Yeah.
Ideally, what does that look like to you?
I mean, I'll give you a really good example where I thought Leidos was doing it well. So Leidos sponsored the 23 car, right? So 2311 Racing, which is Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin. And they brought us out to build a specialized coding kit that had Bubba on the box that they provided to students in Alabama. And I went to my first NASCAR race, which was really exciting, actually. It was more fun than I thought it was gonna be. Like, I would totally go back to NASCAR race if you guys invite me. But they were able to take something where you have a giant fan culture that was a high visibility event and then cross it with STEM and provide students with an activity that could show how they could come into Leidos and work with them. So I think a lot of the sporting events and also just being human, and I'm not talking about anyone's leadership in particular, but I am not willing to let any of the failures that I've had in life shame me. I am more than happy to share anything about my upbringing, my parents' divorce, all that stuff. Because of that, people, they relate to me and they understand. And I think sometimes in our industry, I meet these CEOs and yeah, you're very accomplished now, but you haven't always been. And in order for people to really resonate, we need to be authentic and show who we are and the humanity. I get up every day going to work knowing that my guys at SOCOM ensure that people come home safe. And I lead with that, right? It's not this, scary defense narrative. It's like, I want our employees to help secure this nation and its future. And kids understand that. And so I think what I'm looking for in our industry is also a little bit of like, let's humanize us, right? Let's really talk about the good news stories and the success and why people should care and who we are and how we operate for the greater good. So I think that's probably it. If you have any other questions, I'll be in the back with the latte next to Taylor, who's amazing and has been with me she was at the launch too, so she can give you another perspective. But I just want to thank ClearanceJobs for giving me the opportunity to come here and share my story. It has been a joy, and hopefully we can partner to create a better future.